Today is the big day. We have finally made it to the 2025 NFL Draft. We're finally going to have our questions answered. With the draft capital that our Denver Broncos own, which young players will be our building blocks of the future? And where are all of these other phenomenal prospects going to end up, whose collegiate careers we've been following closely within the Kansas Dynasty on EA College Football 25 and our prospect profiles in this series. Going into the draft, the Broncos had the third overall pick, and in the last episode, which was the draft preview, we went over all of the possible scenarios with that pick. We could stay at number 3 and pick the best player on the board. In this mock draft, for instance, that could be Mason Graham, the defensive tackle out of Michigan. We could stay at number 3 and pick a quarterback, specifically either Jalen Milroe from Alabama or Jalen Daniels from Kansas. It's a bold strategy given that Bo Nix had a solid rookie season, but both of those guys very well may be better long-term players than Bo. The other option would be to trade back to a QB-needy team. Look at the Raiders, the Browns, the Giants, the Jets, and maybe going farther back to the range of Seattle or the Steelers. Certainly a lot of options for us, but before we get started, I've gotten a lot of questions on how you can download the draft class, so I have put it on the vault. It is called Broncos Draft 1 in all caps. I'm pretty sure this works for all next-gen consoles. I hope it does, so everybody can get to use the class in its entirety. That's all you got to do, and from there, you'll be able to download it. And here it is, the exact draft class that we are using for this series. So with that, let's not waste any more time and let's get this show on the road. The 2025 NFL Draft will now be on the clock. The New England Patriots at the number 1 pick, and it hasn't exactly been a very well-kept secret of what the Patriots are going to do. Jordan Birch, the clear top prospect in this draft, he makes a lot of sense for them. And then the draft really starts at number 2. The Cardinals are in a similar spot that we are. They don't have a clear need at quarterback. Mason Graham can make a lot of sense, but they've been heavily mocked Kentucky pass rusher Deion Walker. So with the first pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the New England Patriots select Jordan Birch, edge rusher out of the University of Oregon. No major surprise, Birch was the best defensive player in the nation this year. 24.5 sacks for the Ducks. That breaks the all-time FBS sack record. And he will be the number 1 pick to the New England Patriots, coming in as an 87 overall with superstar development. Keep in mind, these draft classes are juiced. It is worth noting that Birch is comfortably the highest rated player in this draft class. And apparently all the development traits are going to be revealed. I didn't do that on purpose, but I honestly kind of like it that way. So that brings us to the Cardinals. Will they look to trade back? Could it be Mason Graham? Or do they follow the mock drafts and pick Deion Walker? With the second pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Arizona Cardinals select Deion Walker, defensive lineman from the University of Kentucky. Where there's smoke, there's fire. The Cardinals have been heavily linked to Walker this entire time. Even though he was projected to go outside the top 10, they fell in love with him, and it's easy to see why. 6'6", 350 pounds. You do not find his combination of size, athleticism, explosiveness, and production. I think Jonathan Gannon sees a little Jordan Davis in his game, but he's a far better pass rusher than Davis ever was at the University of Georgia. 11.5 sacks this year as a junior with Kentucky, and somebody who has probably the highest upside in this class other than Jordan Birch. And that brings us to number 3 overall. Both of the quarterbacks still here, as we kind of expected. A lot of really good players on the board, including Mason Graham, who's kind of the consensus second defensive player in this class. There's also the avenue of a trade back. Depending on how far back we move in a trade, we could net a lot of draft picks for this year and for the future. So the first scenario that I had mentioned would be a possibility, would be drafting a quarterback here, either Jalen Milroe or Jalen Daniels. A lot of people in the comments seem to be against this idea, and I think I agree. Milroe and Daniels are both better long-term prospects than Bo Nix, but given the amount of holes that this roster has, and given the fact that Bo Nix was a bright spot for us last year and looks like a starting NFL quarterback, he's our guy. I want to build around him, and we're going to roll with Bo. The next avenue would be picking the best player available. I wasn't entirely sure if Mason Graham would fall here. He makes a lot of sense. Maybe we really like one of Isaiah Bond, Will Johnson, James Pierce, Mykel Williams, or Travis Hunter. But if we think all of those guys are relatively equal as prospects, it would probably make the most sense to look to move back because we can get a lot in a trade back. A top 3 pick for a quarterback is going to cost a king's ransom, and we can really jumpstart a rebuild in a trade down. So here are all of the possible scenarios we could look at. I think going back as far as number 6, that's where we start to talk about future first-rounders being added into the deal. The most creative trades that I talked about in the last episode would be that with the Steelers. I think we would either get 3 number 1s or maybe a player back, such as George Pickens, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and possibly even TJ Watt. The 17th pick, a first next year, and TJ Watt for the 3rd pick. And I know it seems unreasonable. He's a future Hall of Famer for the Steelers, but he's 30, he's on the last year of his contract, and a franchise quarterback is priceless. The Steelers don't seem to agree, though, so this idea won't be happening. I think the Giants and the Jets probably make the most sense in a trade back because we, for one thing, would be screwing over the Raiders, our division rival. The Raiders at number 4 will still get a quarterback, but they won't get their choice. We really would end up screwing the Browns, which is funny. They kind of deserve it for trading for a sexual predator. But the other reason why I think one of the Giants or Jets makes the most sense is because we're staying in the top 10, but we would add a first-round pick in next year's draft. That Giants first, I think, would be especially valuable because they're probably not going to be very good next year. The Jets are more likely to be good, so because of that, I'd probably want to add more picks in return. They're a team who could be a playoff contender, whereas the Giants, I think, may struggle, even if their rookie quarterback ends up being good. It's also worth noting that they picked before the Jets, so their first-round pick at number 6 is more valuable than the Jets' pick at number 8. So if we make a deal with the Jets, we would certainly be getting some pretty solid day 2 picks in this year's draft as well. The offer that I had proposed in the last episode would be 2 number 1s along with their 3rd and 5th. Let's compare that to the Giants' offer of 2 number 1s and then probably a 4th this year. So the question is, would I rather probably a higher first-round pick in next year's draft and a higher pick in this year's draft, or some good day 2 picks? I think if the Jets are willing to give us their 2nd-round pick instead of their 3rd, this is something I would lean on doing, and that's the deal that I'm going to agree to. Folks, we have a trade. The Broncos are moving back from number 3 to number 8. We'll also be getting their first-rounder next year, along with pick 40 in the 2nd round and 136 in the 5th round. This is the exact type of trade I was looking for coming into today. We're able to stay in the top 10, but we also add multiple picks in this year's draft, including 40. I want to add more high-end rookies. It's a great draft class, and, well, our team needs all the help it can get. We're also going to get a first-rounder next year, making us major players in the 2026 draft. With the 3rd pick, the New York Jets select quarterback Jalen Milroe out of the University of Alabama. So the quarterback of choice for the Jets will be Milroe, who had a terrific junior season with the Crimson Tide. 3,700 yards, 36 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. But what's most impressive is his accuracy. He completed 76% of his passes, and this is not check down Charlie. He averaged over 10 yards per attempt while being a dynamic rusher. 713 yards. That ended up leading the team. Obviously, it was a disappointing season for Alabama. They went 8-5. Felt like they had 5 losses in the entire tenure of Nick Saban. But nonetheless, Jalen Milroe has been terrific. And he's the type of player who you want to bet on because this is somebody with high-end physical traits who has gotten considerably better and better and better throughout his collegiate career. 90 speed, 93 throw power, 77 overall with star development, and the Jets are going to have him battle with Justin Fields for the starting job. That brings up the Raiders at number 4. This feels like a pretty easy pick for them, but we'll see which route they ultimately go. With the 4th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Las Vegas Raiders select Jalen Daniels, quarterback out of Kansas. Certainly not a surprise here with Milroe off the board and the Raiders obviously needing a quarterback. Jalen Daniels is the one who falls to them, and I think the Raiders are going to be very excited about him leading their franchise. We were treated to be able to watch his senior season this year at Kansas, where he was electric, leading the Jayhawks to a spot in the national championship. He threw for 4,900 yards this year, which led college football, albeit he played more games than any quarterback in the country, so that also helped. He was dynamic as a passer, but he was also efficient. 40 touchdowns and just 5 interceptions, with an interception rate below 1%. On the ground, he was phenomenal. 754 rushing yards and 15 scores. That was tied for the lead in all of FBS. 55 all-purpose touchdowns for Daniels. He's a 76 with superstar development. In our Kansas series, he was the protagonist. He was the hero. He was the main character. And now we're going to play him twice a year as a rival. I think the first time we play the Raiders this year is week 7 or 8, so the calendar is certainly marked for that matchup. And that brings us to the Browns here at number 5. Teams like them and the Giants, they lost the game of quarterback musical chairs with Milroe and Daniels off the board. But there's so many other really good players here. Now, the Browns have been linked to Ted McMillan out of Arizona, but with somebody like Mason Graham here, I could certainly see them changing direction. With the 5th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Cleveland Browns select Teteroa McMillan, wide receiver out of Arizona. So they do go with McMillan. Again, where there's smoke, there's fire. The mock drafts were correct. So even with all those great defensive players on the board, the Browns are going for their likely number 1 receiver of the future. 1,100 yards and 14 touchdowns for McMillan, who comes in at 6'5", physical receiver, can really separate, great hands, great route runner. It's a bold spot picking him here at number 5, but the Browns connected with a big swing. 81 overall with superstar development. He'll be the new number 1 receiver for, I guess, Deshaun Watson for now. Maybe they pick a quarterback later in this draft. That'll bring up Big Blue, the New York Giants. With the 6th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the New York Giants select James Pierce Jr., edge rusher out of the University of Tennessee. So Mason Graham continues to fall. He's on the board at number 7 and could very well make it to Denver at pick number 8. Certainly surprised to see Pierce go this early with a guy like Graham on the board, but I see why the Giants like him. He had 11 sacks this year, 6'5", 240 pounds, a little bit undersized, but he's an absolute freak. Now, he's only a 74 overall with star development, so for being the 6th pick, these ratings are a little bit disappointing, but the Giants still clearly believe in him with Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns in the edge room. We've got a trade at number 7. The Bucs are moving down with the Bears. Chicago has somebody who they had their eye on. Maybe they didn't expect him to fall to 7 and are moving up, jumping the Broncos amongst a few other teams in order to do so, giving up their 2nd rounder along with 12 to the Bucs. With the 7th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Chicago Bears select Mason Graham, defensive tackle out of the University of Michigan. So the national champs had their first player off the board with Graham going to the Bears. How did he fall to 7? No idea. 61 tackles, 16 for a loss, 14 and a half sacks. In the national championship against Kansas, he was an absolute game wrecker. 77 with star development. I've got to say the rating is a little bit lower than I would have expected. So maybe teams were onto something, having him slip a little bit. He looks like a good player, but maybe not the superstar that we would have expected. So the Broncos are on the board at number 8. We've already traded back once. It would be hard to believe that we would do it again. There's still a lot of really good players on the board, as I expected. So there's really 4 guys I would say I'm looking at. Isaiah Bond, the receiver from Texas, with his 4.24 40-yard dash. Will Johnson in the secondary. The thought of him and Patrick Surtain next to each other would be scary. Georgia pass rusher Mykel Williams. This team needs a true number 1 edge, and I think he can be that guy. And then the biggest wild card in this entire draft, Travis Hunter. Will he play wide receiver at the next level? Will he play corner? Will he play both? Certainly an interesting dilemma for whoever drafts him. Maybe that'll be us. So here we go. Let's find out who the selection will be. With the 8th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Mykel Williams, edge rusher out of the University of Georgia. So Denver is going to pick the pass rusher. It's not an overly deep edge class, and that was kind of the tiebreaker for me. I really like Travis Hunter, Isaiah Bond, and Will Johnson, but there's a lot of depth at those positions as the War Room is fired up to make this addition. 6'5", 265 pounds. He's got great size, length, and versatility. I think teams are going to see him very similarly to the way they saw Trayvon Walker. I think there's a lot of similarities. So he's only the 64th ranked player in the class, so at face value it looks like a reach. But I'm going to tell you why he's not. First of all, hidden development. We're off to a good start. So with Mykel Williams, he's one of the youngest players in this draft. He won't turn 21 years old until June. This is a really, really good player who I think profiles very well at the NFL level. As I mentioned earlier, his versatility. He can line up as a 3-4 edge rusher, a 4-3 edge rusher. He can play with his hand in the dirt. And with all the different personnel packages in our defense, we're going to use him in a variety of different ways. What impresses me most about his game is his ability to turn speed into power. This is a freak athlete who tore up the combine. And as we compare him to, say, James Pierce, Pierce is the guy who we kind of viewed as the impressive athlete of this class, but their combine numbers really aren't that far apart. Williams was just as productive as Pierce. He had 10 sacks this season. When we watched him in the SEC Championship and in the college football playoff, he was quite impressive. And when you combine that with his size, his ridiculous arm length, his versatility, and then again, his combination of speed, strength, and power, this is the type of kid you want to build around on your defensive line. 76 overall, it'll be his rating with star development. For now, I have him as number 13. I don't know if I'm going to stick with it. He wore 13 in college. I know it's a weird number for an edge rusher, but Micah Parsons really rocks the number 11, so maybe Mykel Williams can do that with the number 13. And it says something for head coach Simeon Bonnet to pick him, being that Bonnet was a terrific pass rusher himself. He clearly has to see some things in Williams to ultimately make this choice, and Mykel Williams will be the first pick of the Denver Broncos franchise. Let's move forward here in the first round. With the 9th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Carolina Panthers select Shamar Turner, defensive tackle from Texas A&M. With our first 9 picks so far, 6 of them are on the defensive line. It's a top-heavy defensive line group, but it's not overly deep, and these teams at the top know that, so they're picking them all early. Turner had a really good season with Texas A&M as he comes in with superstar development. 11 TFLs, 9.5 sacks. There were some medical question marks with him, but he actually has 98 injury, tied for the highest injury rating of anybody in the class. So that's not going to be an issue for Carolina, and it looks like he's going to be the better player over Mason Graham. Higher rating and better development trait. At number 10, we've got another trade. The Titans are moving back 4 spots with the Dallas Cowboys, who are going to be going up from 14 to 10, giving up their 3rd rounder in the process. The Titans don't have a 3rd rounder this year. They traded it away for L'Jarius Sneed last year, so this kind of makes up for it. They move down 4 spots and they get an all-pro corner. With the 10th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Dallas Cowboys select Travis Hunter, wide receiver / cornerback out of the University of Colorado. I know Jerry Jones had his fingerprints all over this selection. Travis Hunter, the most dynamic player in college football, is a Dallas Cowboy. He really broke out as a receiver this year, nearly 1,400 yards, second in the Big 12 behind Kansas' very own Luke Grimm, and he also scored 12 touchdowns. Hunter will come in with superstar X Factor. To my knowledge, this is one of just 3 players in this class with X Factor. Although I made this class juiced and a lot of players really good, I did not hand out X Factors. I want to see players earn it, and only some of the very most special prospects get this development trait, including Travis Hunter. I think given how good he was a receiver this year, I think he's definitely going to play offense for the Cowboys, but with his 99 stamina rating and the fact that he's also a 77 at corner, I imagine they're going to try him at both. They need players at both spots, so it works. With the 11th pick, the New Orleans Saints select Isaiah Bond out of Texas. I'm a little surprised Bond slipped out of the top 10 after putting on a show in the college football playoff. 500 yards and 5 touchdowns in the 3 playoff games alone. And then at the Combine, he continued his impressive stretch with a 4.24 40-yard dash, finishing with 1,200 yards and 14 touchdowns this year for Texas. 76 with star. He'll pair very nicely with Chris Olave in the Saints receiving corps. That'll bring up the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 12, and they select Kobe Bryant out of Kansas. So Will Johnson is not the first corner off the board, nor is it Ben Morrison or Takario Davis. It's Kobe Bryant, who completely deserves this. He was so good this year at Kansas. 7 interceptions, terrific ball skills, and he was also unbelievably good in coverage. 82 with X Factor, our second X Factor player in the class. This was a gamble for the Bucs to pick him over all the other corners in this class, and they nailed it. Kobe Bryant is somebody who could be one of the best corners in the NFL very early on, and challenges for all pros and defensive player of the years. I'm certainly surprised Will Johnson was not the first corner off the board. I'm shocked he's still here at number 13. Him, Morrison, and Davis are the three highest projected players here. I would definitely expect a run on corners pretty soon, but shout out to the Bucs. They nailed that pick. The Seahawks pick Ashton Gillespie, the edge rusher out of Louisville. Again, it's not an overly deep edge rusher class, so teams are trying to get them while they can. Only a 74 normal, though, for Gillespie, so as we look at all these first-round defensive linemen, outside of Jordan Burch and Shamar Turner, and in my opinion, Michael Williams, a lot of these guys ended up being a little bit lower in terms of rating than what you would have expected. The Titans pick Will Johnson, cornerback out of Michigan. So his fall finally comes to an end. Why did Will Johnson fall? I have no idea. The Titans are going to capitalize, though, as he is an 80 overall with superstar development. There's no good reason for his slip other than some teams being stupid, I guess. The Titans now have a great corner room with L'Jarius Sneed, along with Chidobe Awuzie and Roger McCreary, and now they add Will Johnson. They traded the 10th pick for basically L'Jarius Sneed and Will Johnson. That's incredible. Takario Davis at number 15 off the board to the Packers. I said there'd be a run on corners. Here we go. 6'4", lengthy, big, physical. He'll come in as a 79 overall with star development and should pair nicely in the Green Bay secondary with Jair Alexander. That'll bring us to number 16, the Buffalo Bills, halfway through the first round, and they select Harold Perkins out of LSU, along with Travis Hunter. This is one of the most polarizing players in this class. Perkins is a 0th percentile player in terms of size. He's a 6'1", 220-pound edge rusher, and his archetype is a speed rusher. He has covered a little bit for LSU. He's done a pretty solid job of that, but you're drafting him to go after the quarterback, and with him being that small, it's certainly a gamble. But he's also the only player in this class who's 20 years old. That's a big advantage. He is incredibly young and has a lot of upside. George Pickens, as you can see, wants the Steelers to draft a quarterback. The problem is there isn't really a quarterback worth picking here at number 17 unless they feel comfortable on reaching for someone like Quinn Ewers, Kyron Drones, or Cam Ward. So did the Steelers go best player available, or did they pick a quarterback? Turns out they're going to do neither. This pick is on the move. The Steelers are trading back with a division rival. The Bengals are moving up, giving away a third-rounder, number 87 overall, and a fourth next year. It's not every day we see big trades like this between division rivals, but if both teams feels like it makes sense, they're going to do it. So who are the Bengals moving up for here at number 17? We haven't had any offensive linemen go off the board yet, and that'll change right here. Holland Pierce, the left tackle out of Rutgers, who had a terrific season. He was not on anyone's NFL draft radar coming into the year, and now he's the top tackle off the board, and he's going to be a stud. 80 overall with superstar development. 6'8", 345 pounds. He is a large human who had a ridiculously good season with the Scarlet Knights, and Joe Burrow now has him a blindside blocker. The Steelers might regret letting him go to Cincinnati. Ollie Gordon, running back out of Oklahoma State, is off the board at number 18 to the Houston Texans. So our first running back is off the board. It is Ollie Gordon. There were some questions about the rise of a Marion Hampton stock, but Gordon will still be the top running back when it's all said and done. And with the year he had, it's hard to argue against it. 1,500 rushing yards, 8 yards a carry. He'll be an 82 overall with superstar development, sharing the backfield this year with Joe Mixon, but I imagine it will not be long until he overtakes him as the clear RB1 in the Houston offense. That'll bring up the Eagles at 19. Now looking at some of the playoff teams in this range, and they pick Wyatt Millum, left tackle out of West Virginia. We might start to see a run on offensive linemen, and as I've talked about, offensive line, especially tackle, is certainly a weak point in this draft. I think this range is the sweet spot of when we're going to see guys go off the board, as he is a 75 with star. I don't think he's going to play right away, but this is what the Eagles do. They draft a year or two ahead. Lane Johnson's not getting any younger, and he very well may be the replacement, I suppose, at right tackle. The Niners pick Barrett Carter, linebacker out of Clemson. The linebacker position is very valuable within the Niners defense. Fred Warner, of course, is the best player at the position. Dre Greenlaw's really good as well. But those guys aren't getting any younger. It's good to plan for the future. And they see a lot of those two in Barrett Carter, who they hope to mold and grow into one of the best linebackers in the NFL. Only normal development, but he is a 77 overall. He's a skilled player who can cover, he can blitz, he can stop the run, and he can go after the quarterback a little bit too. At number 21, we've got a trade. The Rams are moving back 4 spots with the Vikings, who will be giving up a third next year. Minnesota does not have many picks to trade away this year. They're actually going to get a 6th back here from the Rams. So this is a complicated move because if you remember last year, the Vikings drafted J.J. McCarthy in the first round. He has the knee injury in the preseason, and the surgery was botched to where J.J. McCarthy has tentatively medically retired. He is not on their roster right now. Their 2 quarterbacks are Hendon Hooker and Mason Rudolph. J.J. McCarthy literally disappeared off their team, so I needed a storyline. And the idea is that Minnesota's trading up for a quarterback here, specifically Kyron Drones out of Virginia Tech, so they choose him over the likes of Quinn Ewers and Cam Ward. Drones is a late addition to this class, coming off his redshirt junior season. I think he could have been a Heisman frontrunner next year and a possible candidate to go very early, but he decides to declare for this year's draft, and he ended up going way earlier than expected, so I guess the decision paid off. He's a 74 overall with normal development and will challenge Hendon Hooker for the starting job. With Minnesota making the playoffs and obviously J.J. McCarthy's career in doubt, I'm surprised they let Sam Darnold walk, but clearly they really like Kyron Drones. They're able to move up and land him. At number 22, the Jaguars pick tight end Colston Loveland out of the University of Michigan. So our first tight end is off the board. If you remember in the free agency episode, the Jaguars traded away Evan Ingram to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and now they get a replacement. Loveland is one of the best tight end prospects to enter the NFL in recent seasons with the likes of Brock Bowers and Kyle Pitts. 76 overall with star development. He'll be a starter for this team right away and a big-time weapon for Trevor Lawrence and company. That brings up the Chargers, and they pick another tight end, Bryson Nesbitt out of North Carolina. I imagine Jim Harbaugh is a little bit disappointed that he couldn't get his hands on Colston Loveland because I think had he been on the board at 23, that would have been the pick. Instead, they go with Nesbitt, who in a lot of ways is pretty similar to Loveland. He's a little bit better, actually, a 79 overall. Only has normal development, though. But the two skill sets are pretty similar. The Chargers clearly went into this draft targeting a tight end. Maybe not the one they were hoping for, but they got one. And then the Steelers pick Quinn Ewers, quarterback out of Texas. So the Steelers moved down, and Ewers was their target all along. I imagine there was a heart attack in their war room when Minnesota traded up. But Ewers has been the apple of their eye. They felt like they could move down a little bit and still land him. 72 overall with normal development. He will challenge Mac Jones for the starting job with the Steelers. George Pickens gets his wish. The Steelers do pick a quarterback in the first round. I thought we were only going to have 2, but now we've had 4 go. And could that mean another team maybe looks to panic and make sure they get their guy, specifically Cam Ward? And because of the quarterbacks going, a lot of these other guys who were not supposed to fall this far are falling a lot farther than expected. And these teams at the back end of the first round, these playoff teams will capitalize. Kelvin Banks, left tackle out of Texas, goes to the Rams. I imagine he would have been their guy at number 21, so they moved back 4 spots. They had a third rounder next year, and they picked Banks, a 74 overall with star development. He was a little up and down this year as a junior with Texas, but still good enough to go here in the first round. And the Rams hope he'll do a good job for Matthew Stafford, and then I guess eventually who becomes their quarterback in the future. The Dolphins pick Luke Kendra, guard out of Cincinnati. Our first interior offensive lineman is off the board, and the run on linemen is continuing. It's not a top-heavy offensive line class, and it's also not a very deep one, so these teams recognize we might have to bite the bullet. Pick one early, because I don't want to wait. 77 normal for Condra. He'll be a good starter, but the ceiling isn't all that high. Bentley Mitchell to the Colts, a small school guy, South Dakota State, going in the first round. Wow, a big pick here by the Colts. His stock has gone way up since the end of the year. 75 overall with star development. He does kind of scream Chris Ballard, a toolsy pass rusher joining the likes of Laiatu Latu and Kwity Paye. Chris Ballard likes his guys, and Bentley Mitchell is the choice. As we've got a trade at number 28, the Browns are going to give up their 2nd and 3rd to the Commanders for a 1st and a 4th. Could this be a trade up for a quarterback? Perhaps. Yes, it is. Cameron Ward is going to the Browns. This is fascinating because Ward for most of the year was projected as a second rounder. He was a little inconsistent towards the end of the year and then really struggled in the quarterfinal game against Oklahoma, where he only completed 50% of his passes. But as I alluded to earlier, it's like a game of musical chairs with all these teams vying for seats, or in this case, quarterbacks. The Vikings got their chair, the Steelers got theirs. There's really only one chair left, with like 5 teams going after it. And the Browns recognized, hey, if we want this seat, we're going to have to be a little desperate. We're going to have to push and shove some teams down to make sure we get our guy. Even though he's not projected anywhere near the first round, what choice do we have? He does have star development, though, which is better than both Drones and Ewers. He'll compete with Deshaun Watson for the starting job there in Cleveland. I wonder who we're all rooting for to win that battle. Go Cam, go. Will Cam Ward be the long-term quarterback of the Browns, finally answering their woes at that position after decades? Trayshawn Holden off the board at number 29 to Atlanta. The fifth-year breakout had a tremendous season with the Ducks. 20 receiving touchdowns that led all of the FBS with 1,250 receiving yards. He'll come in as a 79 overall and should be the Falcons' wide receiver 2 right away to pair up with Drake London. The Falcons are picking another skill position player for the 20,000th season in a row. But Holden looks to be a great addition to that offense. That'll bring us to the Kansas City Chiefs. They picked Denzel Burke, cornerback out of Ohio State. Burke finished just behind Kobe Bryant in interceptions. He had 6, including 1 in each of Ohio State's 2 playoff games. He really impressed me in those 2 playoff matchups, even though the rest of the Ohio State team just kind of felt lethargic and slow. 77 with superstar development, so of course our biggest rival and our number 1 competitor in the AFC West adds a great player to the secondary. Anthony Belton, left tackle, NC State, goes to the Ravens at number 31. Ronnie Stanley's not getting any younger, and he's also made of glass. So the Ravens are preparing for life without him, going with Belton. He's only a 74 with normal. He's also 24 years old, which isn't ideal considering the low rating and development, but I think there's certainly a world where he develops into a starting caliber player. And then at number 32, the defending Super Bowl champion Detroit Lions select Emeka Ibuka, wide receiver out of Ohio State. Ibuka's kind of the one missing piece for this offense. Not that they're really missing anything, they just won the Super Bowl. But Ibuka complements the rest of their receivers and skill position players really well. 76 overall with normal development. I think the floor with him is really high. Very solid season with the Buckeyes this year. 976 yards and 8 touchdowns, averaging nearly 20 yards per reception. And that will bring us into the second round. A very exciting round 1. We were expecting 2 quarterbacks off the board. We ended up with 5. Kyron Drones, Quinn Ewers, and Cam Ward all slip in the back of the first round. As for us, we move back from 3. We get a number 1 next year from the Jets, along with their second, picking Georgia edge rusher Mykel Williams at number 8. So going into the second round now, we have 2 very early picks. We have our own second at number 35, and the Jets second at number 40. A lot of good players left on the board. Some of these corners are slipping. Ben Morrison is still here. We have not had a safety go yet. It's a loaded safety class. Teams figure they can wait a little bit. So guys like Malachi Starks and Billy Bowman are slipping. Only 1 running back has gone off the board as well. I imagine we're going to see a run pretty early on with guys like Amarion Hampton, Donovan Edwards, Devin Neal, and Ashton Genty. So we're going to go a little bit faster, obviously, trying to move quicker. The Patriots add another pass rusher to pair with Jordan Birch. They picked Princey Umanmielen out of Ole Miss. Very solid season with the Rebels this past year. Smael Mondon Jr. goes to the Cardinals, so they add to their defense as well. They get a big guy up front, and now they get one of the top off-ball linebackers, and that'll bring it to us at number 35. All these great defensive backs are still here. I'm really surprised that they've fallen this far. Going into the draft, there was a guy I was targeting at number 35, and he is still on the board. But I think we can wait a little bit to land him. We're going to move back again with the Buffalo Bills, who have number 48. We're going to give up pick 35 and pick 130 to the Bills for their second and third rounder, 48 and 80, along with a future 6. We now have 4 picks on day 2 and 5 in the top 100. I wanted to add a large quantity of impact rookies, and we're going to get the chance to do that. As for the Buffalo Bills, they will finally end the safety drought with Malachi Starks. I kind of figured he'd be the guy they'd move up for, and it's a good pick. 77 with star development. If they had picked him at number 16 in the first round, I wouldn't have batted an eye at all. So now they land him here at 35. They had to give up a little bit, but I think it's worth it. The Las Vegas Raiders select Devin Neal, running back out of Kansas. Another Jayhawk is off the board. The second running back is not a Marion Hampton. It's not Donovan Edwards. It's Devin Neal. We got a front row seat to his senior season this year, and he was electric. He will now share a backfield in Las Vegas with Jalen Daniels. The dynamic duo will be reunited. Devin Neal, Jalen Daniels, teammates in the NFL. He's an 80 overall after the great season he had. 1,500 yards on the ground, nearly 700 through the air, and 16 all-purpose touchdowns. He's the third X-Factor player in this class. And again, lucky us, we get to play him twice a year. We're going to continue to see these running backs go off the board. I definitely thought about Neal at 35 and would have considered him at 40. I guess the temptation to pick a running back with how bad this team was last year kind of goes away now. Maybe it would have been irresponsible for us to do to begin with. That'll bring up the Washington Commanders. They traded out of the first round. The only team in the NFL to not pick in the first round. Everybody held their own first rounders prior to the draft, where obviously we had a flurry of moves. And they pick Ahmed Hassanin, the edge rusher out of Boise State. With all the pass rushers going early, I kind of thought he'd go in the first round. And he probably should. I think he's a 77 overall. Pretty good player. That'll bring us to the New York Giants. They missed a seat in the game of QB musical chairs. They get a good player here. Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State, 77 with Superstar. Andrew Mukuba goes to the Bucs. I am shocked that he's the second safety gone. He's a good player, but I'm really surprised over someone like Billy Bowman, Hunter Waller, Marvin Grant. That really surprises me, but the Bucs nailed the Kobe Bryant pick in the first round, so I can't really doubt them. The player who I had originally targeted at number 35 overall is still here, and I don't want to risk moving down again and him possibly going. This is going to be a great fit for our team. Culture setter, very high character young man, and somebody who I think is going to be a staple of this team for years to come. Are we going to go back to the defensive side of the ball once again, or look on the offensive side? With the 40th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Marvin Grant, defensive back out of Kansas. It was only a matter of time until we would pick a Jayhawk. Marvin Grant was one of my favorite players on this Kansas team last year, and I am so excited to be able to have him once again here in the NFL. Going into the draft, my plan was to pick him at number 35, but with all the safeties falling, I figured we could move down a little bit and pick him at 40, and worst case, if he goes, we could fall back on somebody like Billy Bowman instead. He is the 5th ranked player in the draft. Wow! He only has normal development, but he's going to be a great day one starter right away. This is a physical player who has unbelievable football instincts. Solid ball skills, he's okay in coverage, but I'm most impressed with him as a run defender. He finished the year with 146 tackles, which led the NCAA by about 30. He has a knack for finding the football, and as I mentioned, awareness, play recognition, instincts. This kid is a natural-born football player, and we need that type of guy on our defense. I thought the run defense was pretty solid last year, but we had inconsistent play at safety and linebacker. Yes, I said linebacker. He's going to play in the box quite a bit. And 81 overall. Already, he's going to be one of the best players on our defense. I don't really know where we're going to line him up. He had 150 tackles for Kansas playing safety, which is just remarkable. But with his instincts and his ability to make plays in the run, I think having him near the line of scrimmage might not be a bad idea. Let's keep it moving. Jason Marshall goes to the Panthers. His stock really rose up. Really talented player. I like that pick for them. Jacob Bayer, Arkansas State, the top center off the board. 79 superstar. Great pick for the Titans. And then a Marion Hampton goes to the Saints. I thought there was a chance he'd slide into the first round. With his combination of size and athleticism, I figured teams would really like him. But he ends up being the third running back off the board. 77 with Star. He'll pair nicely with Alvin Kamara for about a year until Kamara is too old to, be good. Riley Mahlman goes to the Bucs. Superstar development for him. And we also have another superstar dev player, Billy Bowman, going to Seattle. How did he fall to the 40s? He was projected to be a top 20 pick. Had no business falling this far. He is a stud. He's one of the best players in this draft. I thought Seattle kind of whiffed on their first round pick, but they made up for it here in the second round. And if you flip Bowman and Ashton Gillety in the first and second round, it looks a lot better. That is a home run pick for them. Donovan Edwards off the board of the Dallas Cowboys. You figure it was only a matter of time until they would finally address the running back position. I thought they'd consider it in the first round. Obviously, they don't. But that's because they know that they're going to be able to land somebody here in round 2. It's a 78 and star for the back-to-back national title. Donovan Edwards smashed the rushing title this year, 1,900 yards, 15 touchdowns. That's like 300 yards more than second place. So the Don will be playing for the Big D. Tommy Hill, cornerback, Nebraska to the Packers. They doubled down on corners. That's a Brian Gutekunst thing. He likes to double down on positions. He's done it before, and he does it again here. 2 corners with his top 2 selections. Now on the board at 48, Benjamin Morrison is still here. Okay, this slip is starting to become suspicious. What's the deal with him? A lot of good players still on the board. I think we're actually going to keep this pick for once, and I think I know exactly who I want. I think it's a fun pick that a lot of people are going to be really excited about. So with the 48th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Ashton Jeanty, running back, Boise State. We're adding to the offense with a big-time playmaker. Ashton Jeanty will be joining the backfield. When I had talked about the Devin Neal pick to the Raiders, I had specifically said that the temptation of picking a running back in the second round probably goes away, and maybe it's a good thing. Yeah, that was a lie. Ashton Jeanty is the 9th-ranked player in the class. He's going to come in with hidden development, and this is a guy who can easily become the long-term running back of our team. He only played around half the year. He missed 6 games due to an injury, but when he was on the field, he was special. In the 8 games he played, 837 yards, 11 touchdowns, 6.7 yards a carry. We got to see him in full in the Mountain West Championship game against Fresno State, which was his first game in about 2 months. And he had a light 207 yards on 8 yards a carry and 3 touchdowns. I think physically, he's built very similarly to Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit. Both of them are around 5'9", maybe around 215 pounds. I don't think Jeanty is quite the athlete and quite as explosive as, say, Jahmyr Gibbs is, but otherwise, I think their games are very similar. The two of them are at their best running in space to the outside, looking to get the explosive run, but they're also tough, physical, and can run in between the tackles, and they're also effective as pass catchers. Jeanty's going to come in as an 80 overall with superstar development. You can make the argument it's irresponsible for a team who won 5 games last year to pick a running back in the second round, and to that I say Ashton Jeanty is going to help this team win some ball games. He's going to be a pivotal point in this offense, and I really like him and Javonte Williams as a duo. He's not overtaking Javonte Williams on the depth chart. The two of them are going to run together. Thunder and lightning, 2 very different players. He'll get to stay wearing blue and orange, and he'll get to stay playing for the Broncos. So Ashton Jeanty is the pick at number 48. That'll bring us to the Steelers. They pick Miles Morale from San Diego State, the guard. That doesn't surprise me at all. He's really the only offensive lineman projected for like another 30 picks. So I figured he'd go pretty soon, and it ends up being right now. At number 50, the Lions are moving up from 64, giving the Texans a 3rd rounder next year. Brad Holmes likes his guys, and I think sometimes he can have tunnel vision in terms of getting the players he wants. But it's a good trait of his because he's able to identify the guys he really wants, and he goes out and he gets his done. In this case, it's defensive tackle Junior Tafuna, one of the older players in this class, but a really good season with the Utes. We've got another trade at 51. We're moving right back on the clock, trading up with the Philadelphia Eagles. So we're going to trade our 3rd rounder, 67, and our 4th rounder, 99, to get this done, also swapping a future 5 and a future 6. With some of the other day 3 picks we've gotten in our 2 trade downs with the Jets and the Bills, I feel like I can afford to move a 3rd and a 4th to go up here to 51 because there's another guy that I really want, and I don't think he's fallen to the 3rd round. A really, really good player who I think is going to make a huge impact for us. We've already had 2 big hits in the 2nd round with 81 overall Marvin Grant and 80 overall Ashton Jeanty. So how are we going to answer that here with our 3rd pick of the 2nd round? Will we pick another potential star player for this team at this spot with moving up? With the 51st pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Jeffrey Bussa, linebacker out of the University of Oregon. So Bussa is the guy we're going to be moving up for. He had a fascinating season. and is a guy who I don't really know where we're going to use him, kind of similarly to Marvin Grant. But what I do know is that he is a really, really good player and the type of guy who I want to build this defense around. Another guy who's a really high character kid, team captain at the University of Oregon. Obviously, the Ducks had a terrific season, and he's going to come in as the 70th ranked player on the board, so a little bit of a reach, but he does have hidden development, and I'm not too worried about the value. I think he's a really good player. So going into the year, Bassa was looked at as a very traditional off-ball linebacker, somebody who can cover, somebody who can stop the run. But Oregon used him in a really interesting way. They lined him up at edge rusher sometimes. They also used him as a design blitzer, and he finished with 14 sacks. Now, I don't think he's going to be a double-digit sack per season kind of guy in the NFL, but you don't walk into 14 sacks in the Big Ten. This is somebody who is a playmaker in the passing game, 76 with star development. At 6'2", 230, he's a little bit too undersized to play edge. He's going to be an off-ball linebacker for us, but I'm going to have him blitz a lot. That really worked during his time at Oregon, and I could certainly see it excelling in the NFL. I think him and Marvin Grant together in the box could be a really, really fun pairing. Let's move a little bit forward now. Walter Nolan to the Niners, former #1 recruit, raw player with some upside. Davin Van stays in state. NC State to the Panthers. He's a really good player. Quinshon Judkins to the Jaguars. Interesting. So I guess they don't want to pay Travis Etienne long term. Now, Judkins is only a 75 with normal, so a little bit disappointing. But he's also only 21 years old, coming off a very strong season this year with the Buckeyes. Nearly 6 yards a carry and 11 touchdowns. Ricardo Hallman, a late entry to this draft out of Wisconsin, the corner. He goes to the Los Angeles Chargers. Sebastian Castro, the versatile defensive back from Iowa, ends up in Cincinnati with the Bengals. Minnesota picked a quarterback in the first round. I don't think they pick again until like the 5th round. They pick Will Campbell, a blindside blocker for their QB. Campbell was a projected top pick going into the year. Did not have a very good season, but Minnesota still believes in the tools. Josh Kelly, an older but talented receiver, goes to the Dolphins. Damian Martinez, running back, to the Colts. They liked what Chuba Hubbard provided them when they got him at the deadline. They want to keep another guy in there with Jonathan Taylor. The Las Vegas Jayhawks at 61 get Miles Hinton, left tackle out of Michigan. They got this pick in the Colton Miller deal at the deadline with Washington, so he's going to be their replacement, and he looks pretty damn good. An 81 overall. The Raiders so far are doing a terrific job of building around their new quarterback. I thought Hinton was excellent in the college football playoff and the national championship. He shut down the dynamic pass rusher Dekias Brinkley at the Jayhawks. As Quincy Riley, corner out of Louisville, goes to the Falcons. And we've got another trade. Jacksonville moving up, giving a 3 and a 4 to get this pick from Kansas City. They got Quinshon Judkins earlier. And after focusing on offense with their first 2 picks, they'll go to the defensive side of the ball with Caden Woolard, the edge rusher from Oklahoma. Hunter Wohler, safety out of Wisconsin, finally off the board. He goes to the Ravens. And then the Houston Texans at 64 get Ariante Ursary, the tackle out of Minnesota, and that'll wrap up the second round. This was a loaded second round, as you'll notice here, particularly at the top half of the round. So many good players here, and we took full advantage moving up and down the board, ending up with 3 picks in round 2, selecting defensive back Marvin Grant, running back Ashton Jeanty, and linebacker Jeffrey Bassa. 3 players who I think are going to be really good. I'm very excited about all of them being added to the team, and I expect each of them to have very big roles for us this season. Now, in the move for Bassa, we traded away our 3rd and 4th rounder, losing some of the picks that we owned in the middle of this draft. But remember, with the trade that we made at the start of round 2 with Buffalo, we still have a pick here in the 3rd round at number 80. There were no wide receivers off the board in the 2nd round other than Josh Kelly at number 57 to the Dolphins, so I think we're going to start to see a run. Alec Ayomanor out of Stanford to New England. Here's another. Luke Grimm out of Kansas goes to the Cardinals. He'll pair up with Marvin Harrison Jr. in Arizona. Grimm led the NCAA in catches with 105, and then yards with nearly 1,500. Now again, Grimm played more games than anybody, but that's still really impressive. He mostly played in the slot at Kansas, but being 6 foot with solid enough athleticism, I think he'll be able to line up on the outside pretty effectively at the NFL level, and I think he's going to be a fun addition to that offense. That'll bring up the Eagles. I don't think they'll continue the run on receivers after trading for Terry McLaurin earlier in the offseason from the rival Washington Commanders. So ultimately, they will end up going with C.J. Taylor, safety from Vanderbilt. He's really good. 78 overall superstar development. Back to the trend on receivers. Jaden Higgins, Iowa State to the Raiders. 75 with Superstar. Another great pick going to Las Vegas. They are building an empire around their young quarterback. Ever since Jalen Daniels got drafted here 20 minutes ago, they've given him a great running back, a great receiver, and a great left tackle. The Washington Commanders keep the run going. They get Luther Burden III, wide receiver out of Missouri. That'll bring us to the Giants. Now 5 receivers picked in the first 6 selections of round 3. They get Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. He was projected to go in like the 30s. Ended up slipping a little bit, and I guess for good reason. He's only a 73 overall. That'll bring us to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers now. They pick Ty Wise, linebacker out of the University of Miami of Ohio. Of course, he missed the combine. Jabbar Muhammad, corner out of Oregon to the Jets. Josh Connerly Jr., another Oregon Duck. He'll be the new left tackle in Carolina. Jaden Ott, running back from Cal to the Chiefs. I guess they don't want to pay Isaiah Pacheco long term. And then Carson Beck goes to the Saints. 74 overall, normal development. He is rated higher than Kyron Drones, Quinn Ewers, and Cam Ward. All those guys were picked at the end of the first round. The Saints get Beck here in the 3rd. Could he challenge for the starting job over Derek Carr and possibly be the quarterback of the future? Tate Ratledge from Georgia, the guard, ends up going to the Bears. Seattle gets Riley Mills, defensive tackle, Notre Dame. Very good pick, 78 overall. And then the Titans with a home run here with linebacker Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma. He's an 80 overall. The Titans are killing this draft. They've picked an 80, a 79, and another 80. J.J. Weaver, edge rusher from Kentucky, goes to the Packers. He's an older prospect at 25. And that'll bring us here to the Denver Broncos at number 80. I don't think there's going to be much drama this time. There's a guy I want. I've been targeting him since the start of the 3rd round, and lucky for us, he has fallen here to this spot. Let's see who it'll be. Will it be another defensive player, or do we go back to the offensive side of the ball? With the 80th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Savon Revel Jr., cornerback out of East Carolina. We have been very focused on building the defense in this draft, and even with Benjamin Morrison and Devin Kirkwood on the board, I really like Savon Revel. I think he's a guy who could be a starter for us in the back end, and he's going to be the pick. I really like the physicality and toughness he brings to the table, as he's the 52nd ranked player in the class. Pretty good value. Unfortunately, only normal development, however. 6'3", 185 pounds. This is somebody who's physical in press coverage. He can defend the run. And somebody who, similarly to a guy like Marvin Grant, he plays with instincts. I think he's a really good man-cover player, solid enough in zone as well, and he's a fine athlete. He's nothing spectacular. He ran a mid-4.5s 40-yard dash, which isn't bad, but it's nothing to get overly excited about. He's been a consistent covered player with the ECU Pirates, has shown solid ball skills with 2 interceptions last year. He's a 76 overall, so he'll likely challenge with Riley Moss to start on the outside, opposite of Patrick Surtain. And if he develops into a good long-term player, we're going to have a nice corner room with Moss, Surtain, and of course Chris Abrams-Drain as well in the slot. I really like that pick for us. That'll bring us to the second half now of round 3. As it stands now, we don't pick until the middle of the 5th round, so it might be a while bearing a trade. Josiah Stewart, edge rusher from Michigan. He's undersized, but he's very talented. John Lewis, the athletic cover linebacker, goes to the Texans. Jordan Watkins, receiver to the Eagles. I didn't think the Eagles would pick a receiver this high, but they do. I guess they don't view Terry McLaurin as a long-term piece, given his age and regression last year. Jeremiah Byers, tackle, Florida State to the Niners. Greg Penn, linebacker, LSU to the Rams. He's a really good player, 78 with Superstar. Tiger Shanks, offensive tackle out of UNLV, goes to the Kansas City Chiefs. Another tight end finally off the board. It's been a while. Tyler Warren from Penn State joins his fellow Penn State tight end, Pat Freiermuth. Rocket Sanders, running back, South Carolina to the Bengals. Tysheem Johnson, defensive back, Oregon to the Jaguars. That's a great pick. 78 overall superstar development for Johnson. Logan Parr, guard to the Eagles, their 3rd pick of round 3. Jedi Barron from Texas, very versatile defensive back, listed as a safety. I think he'll be at his best in the nickel. Mekhi Hughes, running back out of Tulane, goes to the Washington Commanders, out into their offense. Connor Colby, guard, Iowa, really good pick to New England. He's going to be a very good player. Jay Higgins, linebacker to the Chiefs, high floor guy who I think is going to stick in this league for a while as a starter. Xavier Watts, another safety to Baltimore. Back-to-back safety picks for them. That's interesting, but 2 good players. And then the Jets pick another defensive back, the versatile Malachi Moore out of Alabama, who can play just about everywhere. That'll wrap up the third round for us. A lot less dramatic than round 2. We stay with the 16th pick in the round, and we ultimately stick on defense with Savon Revel, the corner out of ECU. 4 of our first 5 picks have been on the defensive side of the ball. I think the defense was the bigger weakness last year, and we have made it a point to get better on that side of the ball. We traded for Jordan Davis, and now we've really focused on it here in the draft. That brings us into day 3. Some surprises. Benjamin Morrison is still on the board. He was supposed to go in the top half of the first round. Something clearly is up with him. Did he murder someone? That has to be the only reason as to why he's still there. We don't own a pick right now in the 4th, but knowing me, that could change pretty quick. We own the Jets 5th and 3 6s. So let's get started here with round 4. I think we're going to see on a run on running backs. There's a lot of good ones, including Phil Maffa, 78 overall to New England. He only has normal dev, though. Tyleik Williams, defensive tackle, Ohio State to the Cardinals. Mitchell Evans, tight end, Notre Dame to the Eagles. He'll pair up with Dallas Goedert. Anthony Johnson, corner, Western Kentucky. I really like him. He had the game-winning interception week 1 on Jalen Milroe against Alabama. He's a good player, as is Jordan James, the running back from Oregon. I didn't think he'd go this high, but I like this pick for the Browns. He's a 77. Cooper Mays, center to the Giants. Terrence Ferguson, tight end from Oregon to the Chiefs. This is a really interesting player and a very good landing spot for him. With Travis Kelce retired, he very well may take that spot from him. 73 with star development. Could this be the replacement for Travis Kelce? I think there's some similarities in their games. Landon Jackson, raw, physically talented edge rusher to the Jets. Eli Cox, center to Carolina. Ajani Cornelius, the tackle from Oregon, goes to the Tennessee Titans. Tight end Jake Brenningstool to the Saints is one of the biggest steals in this draft. 78 overall with star development. Thank God he did not go to the Chiefs. Tosh Baker, offensive tackle to Buffalo. Rod Moore from Michigan, the defensive back, goes to Seattle. Mello Dotson off the board to the Dallas Cowboys. So the Cowboys picked Travis Hunter in round 1. Who knows if he'll play corner? I do know that Mello Dotson will not only play corner, but he'll play it at a pretty high level. Of course, he paired up with Kobe Bryant in the Kansas secondary, and teams threw the ball his way a lot because, well, they knew better than to throw it towards Bryant. Mello Dotson was not as good as Kobe Bryant was, but he was still solid. 3 interceptions, including the one in the national championship, as he comes in with star development being a 75 overall. Will Howard to the Packers, another quarterback. They have invested a lot into getting a good backup. Might they finally have one? Elijah Alston, the edge rusher out of Miami, goes to the Bills. Elijah Badger to the Titans. Their 4th player who's at least a 79 overall. They are killing this draft. Shout out to Rand Carathon, the general manager in Tennessee. Colin Oliver, another Oklahoma State player to the Texans. Ozzie Trapillo to the Eagles, offensive tackle. Kyle Monangai, running back, Rutgers to San Francisco. He's a 78 with superstar. I told you there's some good running backs here on day 3. The Niners look to have gotten their long-term replacement for Christian McCaffrey. The last time the Niners drafted a Rutgers running back on this channel, it went pretty well, so they're going to do it again. Shedeur Sanders to the Rams. 73 with star. Interesting. Matthew Stafford's rating regressed a lot last year. I think this will be his last season as a starter. Could Shedeur Sanders be the franchise quarterback of the Rams in terms of rating and dev trade? It's certainly possible. Jack Nelson, offensive tackle to the Jaguars. Tight end Luke Lackley from Tight End University. He goes to the Browns. Jasheen Davis from Wake Forest ends up with the Bengals. Jacksonville again gets Clay Webb, guard from Jacksonville State. He's still in Jacksonville, kind of. Thor Griffith, defensive tackle to the Dolphins. Elijah Roberts from SMU, edge rusher to the Colts. Darius Washington, offensive tackle to the Washington Commanders. Atlanta gets Jonas Sanker, defensive back out of the University of Virginia. Donovan Iziriaku, the edge rusher out of Boston College, goes to the Chiefs. Another good pick by Kansas City. Joshua Gray, guard, Oregon State to the Ravens. And then the Browns will wrap up the 4th round as they pick Sebastian Benjamin, a pretty good pick, edge rusher out of Western Kentucky. So that'll wrap up round 4. No picks for us, but a lot of good players here. Plenty of good running backs. Plenty of good tight ends. I think I said Jake Brenningstool was a 78. He's actually a 79. What a pick by New Orleans. And then again, I got to shout out the Titans with wide receiver Elijah Badger out of Florida. The Titans are winning this draft. They have done incredible. And in the 5th round, Ben Morrison is still there. Devin Kirkwood is still there. Jack Sawyer, the edge rush from Ohio State, is still there. We have a pick at 136, remember, from the Jets, as New England picks linebacker Kareem Reed. He screams New England Patriot to me, and he's a good player, 76 overall. Makari Page out of Michigan at the Bills, the 6'4 safety. Ethan Miner, center, out of Mississippi State. I really wanted him, not just because we would have Miner and Miners next to each other on the offensive line, but I think he's a good player. He would have been my target at 136. Howard Cross to the Raiders. Chris Hardy to the Vikings. Very productive pass rusher. I think he's a 75 overall. Drew Moss, guard to the Giants. And Tyreen Powell, linebacker from Rutgers to the Bears. So that brings us up here with the 8th pick in round 5. As I said, I wanted Ethan Miner. We need a center, and having Miner and Miners together would have been pretty funny. But there is another player I like here, so we're going to stick and pick here and ultimately land, hopefully, another good player. With the 136th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Tez Johnson, wide receiver out of Oregon. For those of you who know the backstory, this is a really fun pick. So for those of you who may not know, Tez Johnson is Bo Nix's brother. I know, they look like twins. No, but actually, Tez Johnson is Bo Nix's brother. Tez Johnson was adopted in high school by Bo Nix's family. He played high school ball for Bo Nix's dad. The two of them were teammates at the high school level, teammates for a year at Oregon, and now teammates in the NFL. How cool is this? And we're getting a good player here. He's small, 5'9", maybe 5'10", weighs in at 160, but he is electric with the ball in his hands. 4'3", 240, the second fastest 40 time at the wide receiver position in this draft, only behind Isaiah Bond. Now, he was clearly a little bit behind in the pecking order in the Oregon offense with Evan Stewart and Trayshawn Holden there. He only had around 800 yards, but he did have his best game of the year in the playoff against Kansas. 3 catches for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's a 76 overall. He's a really good player right off the bat and will compete for early reps. I think he has a lot of similarities to Marvin Mims, who obviously had a really good season last year and looks to be a long-term starter here. So I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work. I was more focused on value here than fit, and we're definitely getting good value. And he certainly has chemistry with Bo Nix. So in that sense, I think it could be a pretty good fit. And obviously, the storyline's pretty awesome. Michael Ford, guard, Kansas, going to the Panthers. Caleb Rogers, guard to the Titans. Power Echols, linebacker out of UNC, goes to the New Orleans Saints. The Bears pick a running back, Trevion Henderson out of Ohio State. He'll complement DeAndre Swift. Caden Pricecorn, tight end out of Ole Miss. He's an older prospect, 25 years old, as is tight end Brant Kuthi, 25 years old, but a really impressive athlete out of Utah, goes to Dallas. Logan Jones, center out of Iowa, to the Packers. Pat Jenkins, defensive tackle from Tulane, goes to Houston. Gunnar Maldonado, safety out of Arizona, to the Steelers. The Eagles get Jesus Machado. He was impressive in the games that we watched with Tulane at linebacker. And then the Eagles right back up, pick Kamen Rucker, edge rusher out of North Carolina. Jack Sawyer finally off the board, former #1 recruit. Never put it together at Ohio State, but he's very physically gifted. Jadehayon Coleman to the Rams at corner from Prairie View A&M. Daniel King, offensive lineman of the Jags. Marley Cook, undersized but skilled defensive lineman, 10.5 sacks this year at Miami. Kane Myrick, kind of the opposite. Really impressive athlete, small school guy out of Villanova. Running back Jarquez Hunter to the Vikings. Tight end Jalen Conyers to the Dolphins. The Panthers get linebacker Jason Henderson, maybe the smartest player in terms of football IQ in the entire draft. Shiloh Sanders goes to Washington. John Pius, edge rusher to the Atlanta Falcons. The Chiefs get Marcus Harper II. That's a pretty good pick. Guard out of Oregon. Riley Leonard to Baltimore. That actually makes a lot of sense. He has some similarities to Lamar Jackson in his game, so he makes a good fit as a backup. And then Xavier Truss, the guard out of Georgia, goes to the Lions. So that'll wrap up the 5th round. I think we made out pretty well with Tez Johnson as a 76 overall, one of the higher-rated players drafted in this round. And obviously the chemistry with him and Bo Nix should be a lot of fun. He also pairs up with his former Oregon receiver teammate, Troy Franklin. So the Oregon love triangle reunited, if you will. And that'll bring us into the 6th round. It should be a busy one for us as we have 3 picks here. Ben Morrison is still on the board. It might have been a double or triple homicide at this point. We have 163, so that's coming up in like 30 seconds, along with 170 and then 185. So another opportunity for us to add some good players. Hopefully 1 or 2 of these guys can end up making an impact for us. So New England here at number 161 select Justin Jacobs, linebacker from Oregon. And then the Cardinals get Demetrius Hardeman, the edge rusher out of Bowling Green. And that sends us here at 163. Some good players here. Maybe we look to end the run on Ben Morrison, although he's slipping for a reason. It would be awfully risky. So I think I know who we ultimately will select here at this spot. With the 163rd pick of the 2025 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Rivaldo Fairweather, tight end out of Auburn. You can make the argument that tight end might be the biggest need on this roster, with Greg Dulcich having a disappointing season last year. Maybe Lucas Kroll turns into something, but we did not have great tight end production last year. We did not add to the tight end position yet in the offseason, so we kind of had to at some point picking Rivaldo Fairweather. He's raw, but he's got some interesting tools, and he comes in with hidden development. Fairweather wasn't the most consistent player at Auburn, but I believe in the upside. He only had 32 catches for 347 yards this year, and something he has in common with Greg Dulcich is both of their season high in receptions was a whopping 4. But nonetheless, I really like the athleticism, 6'4", 250, good size, good quickness. And I like what he provides as a receiver. He can run routes, he's got pretty good hands, and I don't think he's a complete liability at all as a blocker. He's pretty solid in the run game and somebody who I think has the upside to be a long-term starter, coming in as a 71 overall. I think given the current state of our tight end room as well, he will be competing for playing time this year, and I'm excited to see what he does in the preseason for sure, because I think he could have a pretty big role early on, despite his low rating. Lucky for us, we pick again pretty soon in 170. Washington picks Taj Brooks. They picked another running back earlier, Mekhi Hughes, and now they pick Brooks from Texas Tech. Dante Kent, super explosive player. That's going to be a really pick for Cleveland, a 75 overall corner. Marquez Cox goes to the Giants. Cam Horsley, defensive tackle, Boston College, ends up with the Buccaneers. The Jets pick Marlowe Wax, one of my favorite names in this class, linebacker from Syracuse. And then Jack Sherwin, tackle out of Western Michigan. He's an undersized player, but I think he's actually going to be a really good guard at the next level. That's a nice pick. And that brings us on the board here with the 10th pick of the 6th round and our second of 3 selections here around number 6. So we'll see which avenue that Denver looks for here at this slot. With the 170th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Benjamin Morrison, cornerback out of Notre Dame. The slide finally comes to an end. Morrison was projected as the second corner off the board. It looked like he had a pretty good combine. Listed as the projected 12th pick in this year's draft, and he falls all the way to 170. I figure at this point, why not take a shot? I don't think he should be falling to the 6th round. I think he's a little bit too good. Now, interestingly, his true value is at 166, so maybe teams were right to let him slip. Nonetheless, the talent was certainly shown this year. He won them the game against USC. He had 2 interceptions in this matchup, had 3 on the year. Really solid cover player as well. He comes in with solid size, 6 foot, 186, tested better than expected at the combine. Good zone coverage player, good man coverage player. I'm not really sure what teams are missing. Do they not like his work ethic or his character or something? He's a 72 with normal, so certainly not worthy of going in the first round where he was projected. But again, at just 21 years old, I think this is certainly someone who could be a pretty good player. And round 6 feels like an absolute steal. Hopefully it was not a double or triple homicide. And assuming it's not, we'll be happy to keep him on this team and look to develop him in the secondary. Rashad Green, tackle out of Tulane, goes to the New Orleans Saints. Don't forget, we pick again here in round 6, late in the round at 185. DJ Thomas Jones, a highly productive tight end out of South Alabama, goes to the Bucs. I thought about him over Fairweather earlier in the round. Manny Nunnery, edge rusher from Texas State, goes to Seattle. Rayuan Lane III, that's a nice pick. Safety from the Navy, going to Dallas. Dorian Strong, another corner for the Packers, their 3rd. Speaking of corners, John Humphrey from USC ends up in Buffalo. The Steelers get Nick Jackson, linebacker from Iowa. That's a pretty solid pick. Jonah Monheim, center from USC. Superstar development, a steal for the Texans. And then speaking of, 76 overall, superstar development for Deion Burks. What a pick for the Eagles. They've got a lot of young receivers now after picking Watkins in the 3rd, and now Burks here in round 6, one of the biggest gems in this class. Maurice Westmoreland to the Niners, Aiden Huntington to the Vikings, Danyai Taylor to Jacksonville, Xavier Carlton, the 26-year-old linebacker prospect of the Bengals. If he's that old, you got to hope he's good. And he's not. He's only like a 68 overall. He's one of the lowest rated players in this class. That's what you get for picking somebody that old. The Bengals would then pick another linebacker with Eugene Asante. And that brings us to our final pick of the day. Round 6, number 25. Who will be likely the final pick for the Broncos? With the 185th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Gus Hartwig, center, out of Purdue. We finally pick an offensive lineman. Given the inconsistencies of our offensive line this year, I would have loved to pick one earlier. The problem is it's not a very good offensive line class, and this team needs to focus on value more than need, and theoretically we do have all of our starters set for the offensive line, so it's not like we had to force a pick early. Hartwig comes in with normal development, 6'5", 315 pounds, really solid as a pass protector this year, only allowing 3 sacks. He's a inconsistent run blocker, definitely a weakness to his game, and that's going to drag his rating down quite a bit. If he can develop in the run game, I think he could be pretty good, though. Really impressive athlete, though. He was disappointing at the combine, and his stock went down, but he is one of the more athletic offensive linemen in this class, and he'll come in as a 69 overall. Nice. So he'll likely be the backup behind Sam Mustipher, but could possibly challenge for the starting spot down the road. And with that, we are out of picks, at least for now. Maybe we look to move up in the 7th round. There are still a few good players who I like left, but we may also just wait until undrafted free agency to pick some of them up. Justin Osborne, offensive tackle out of SMU, goes to the Dolphins. Bryce Benhart, 6'10", tackle out of Nebraska to the Colts. I thought about him throughout the 6th, ultimately opting against it, but I do like him. Kevin Swint, linebacker, Georgia State to the Eagles. Georgia defensive tackle Nazir Stackhouse stays in state, going to the Falcons. The Chiefs pick a fullback. Okay. Rashad Cheney, defensive tackle out of USF, goes to the Ravens. And then the Lions pick Jared Casey, tight end out of Kansas. He was money for the Jayhawks throughout the playoffs. I'm happy for him ending up with the Super Bowl champs backing up Sam Laporta. So that will wrap up the 6th round. We end up with 3 picks, most notably the projected first-rounder Benjamin Morrison, who's only a 72 overall. But I do like him, and I think there is a world where he can become a starter for us in the long term. He's only 21 years old. That brings us into the 7th round. I'm surprised Devin Kirkwood is still here. A lot of good receivers, including Lawrence Arnold, who you can see by his talent grade absolutely should not have fallen to the 7th round. Since we don't have the pick here and we don't plan on making any moves, we're going to skip right through the 7th round and go through some of the highlights here. A couple guys I thought about were Burt Hale and Ruben Hippolyte, 2 players I considered in round 6. They end up going with the first 2 picks in round 7. The UCF backfield off the board, KJ Jefferson to the Bengals, RJ Harvey to the Chargers. Lawrence Arnold finally gets picked by the Saints. Love that pick for them. Nearly 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns. He was excellent in the playoff. Do teams not watch those games at the end of the year? How does he go in the 7th? Dominic Lovett, 77 overall receiver to the Dolphins. Dylan Gabriel to the Steelers with Quinn Ewers. Devin Kirkwood finally off the board. He does have star development going to Minnesota. And then Mr. Irrelevant ends up being Jaleel Farouk, the wide receiver out of Oklahoma, going to Detroit. And that will wrap up the draft. I think things went very well for us. We moved back in the 1st round. We land Mykel Williams, the edge rusher from Georgia. And then day 2, I think this is where we won the draft with Marvin Grant, Ashton Genty, Jeffrey Bassa, and Savon Revel. And then day 3, we did pretty well with Tez Johnson, Rivaldo Ferryweather, Ben Morrison, and Gus Hartwig. Some teams who I want to highlight around the league as well. I thought the Raiders killed it. Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal reunited, and they're going to build around those guys well. The Browns, I thought, made out pretty good. A bold pick early with Tet McMillan, but it worked out. And they're going to have a fun offense with Cam Ward and Jordan James. Dante Kent as well in round 6, and Sebastian Benjamin. Really good value for them across the board. I thought the Chiefs did well. Unfortunately, a few really good players early on. The Eagles had a really deep draft. A lot of really solid players here, including Deion Burks, one of the biggest steals in this draft. Again, 76 with Superstar. For a team who's drafted really poorly in recent years, Carolina was excellent with Shamar Turner, Jason Marshall, and David Van. They hit on all those picks. Their lowest rated player is a 72. Good players across the board. New England obviously getting Jordan Burch early. I thought otherwise they did good. Phil Maffa is going to be able to play pretty early on. Princely Uman is going to be a good pairing with Jordan Burch. And then the Titans did unbelievably well. Will Johnson, 80. Jacob Bayer, 79. Danny Stutzman, 80. Elijah Badger, 79. Woo, they killed it. Shout out to Tennessee, another team who has not drafted well at all in recent years, and they did terrific this season. That'll wrap up our episode, a long one, but I hope you guys enjoyed. And then in the next episode, we'll go through the preseason and we'll start our regular season. We'll open up at home against Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders. Then we've got Caleb Williams on the road with the Bears. Week 6, that game is marked on the calendar for sure. Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal come to town. Week 7 in Kansas City, that'll be a fun one. Play the Raiders again in Week 13, and we wrap things up Week 18 against the Colts. No primetime games, interestingly. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. This team has to earn it. But I think given our offseason, especially our draft, we're going to be a lot better than we were a year ago, hopefully. Otherwise, something went horribly wrong, and maybe we should have picked a quarterback at 3. But we'll see. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. I hope everybody enjoyed the episode. You guys know that these draft episodes always take a lot for me to get done, so I would really appreciate if you could leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new and enjoyed the episode. Peace out.